Welcome everybody. This is posted as a school committee finance subcommittee meeting. The purpose of which is to explore options for funding the schools for the next hopefully several years. To explore options for what that might look like, with a particular emphasis on what we need in order to model that out from the town side and the school side. So what I'd like to do is kind of go around the room for introductions so that everybody in the audience knows who everybody is, and give us each an opportunity to briefly, say what you hope to get out of this. Because I think it's, some subset of folks have met for a while under the guise of collaboration. Some of us have not. So I think it's important that, we kind of articulate what we hope to get out of this meeting. We may not solve everything today. We are unlikely to solve everything today. But if we walk out of here with a good sense of what we need to do and where it is, and we can just go around the table. Anna?
Sure, I'll go. Anna Mitchell, the school committee Manchester rep, and also the school committee finance subcommittee rep. Thank you everybody for coming here today, and I'm so glad over the past few years that we are finally able to, this is a step forward. I think we all know that this is not a school district problem, this is not a specific town problem, this is the three entity problem that we need to work through together. The problem is not us, it's the funding that the limited 2.5% that we're getting, but we need to figure out how we can work within that restriction at this moment between the three towns, between the three entities. What I'm hoping to get out of it is just a step forward. I don't think we're gonna resolve this year, to be honest, but I do think that if we can find a path forward over the next few years, that will be a success.
There.
I'm Sarah, chair of the Manchester Finance Committee. I think that over the past couple of years, there's certainly been a challenge getting both towns on the same page of the book. It does no good for Manchester to approve a school budget and for Essex to not approve it. So somehow we have to come up with some type of budget that's livable. And I also would like to find out what the impact would be on the operating budget if there was one elementary school versus two. I think that's an important number to know. I'm sure it doesn't make a difference, but I think it's an important number to know.
Administrator for Manchester. I think that it would be a major step forward if we can brainstorm sort of out of the box thinking, because the typical approach isn't going to solve it. We have a significant structural problem that we face year after year after year. And I think we need to broaden our horizons on what the solutions might be out there. Are there broader regional efforts that might help? Are there restructuring of the town and or school districts, looking to our other neighbors that might be productive? That's not going to solve it for next year. That's a multi-year process. I think we need to seriously think about broader ideas.
And a book is called Let's Talk Shit.
Mute that person, or should I? Got it. And
Ann Harrison, Chair of the Manchester Select Board. I am here to see how you put 45 pounds of stuff in the 20-pound bag. The problem essentially is that the schools are personnel driven. The personnel salaries go up at 3.5% to 4%, sometimes more, and the personnel costs are going up by 27% this year. Manchester wants excellent schools. And excellent schools are very expensive, particularly if you have a very small school body. And we do. We are, I believe, the smallest district in the state. So I'm not here to look for a solution for this year. I'm here to see what people are willing to talk about to allow us to deliver the range of that my town wants, at a price that everyone in the district can match.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Michelle Cresta, the Director of Finance and Operations for the school district. And I just want us all to be on the same page. We are, of course, going to open the door for schools regardless of what the budget, looks like. But we really need to get on the same page about what we want our program to look like and what we expect as two communities educating our students. So I'm also on the town finance side in my hometown, so I certainly understand the struggles, town versus school. But it's real, but we really need to all be in agreement as to what we expect and what we want to do and how we're going to make it work. There are constraints, but we need to find ways to work through those.
I'm Pam, Superintendent of Schools. People who have spoken before captured many of my sentiments. I would say I'm very optimistic because we are here, and I think we're acknowledging that we do have a structural deficit and that we run in structural deficit every year to try to achieve the needed assessment. That necessarily means that every few years we will need to catch up because we cannot live there indefinitely. And I think we're clearly there. This year we've been teetering on the edge of that for several years. We've been able to manage locally, manage at the district level by using some combination of cuts and reserves over this interim period. But we are at the point where future cuts are going to lead to a direct degradation of the program, whether immediate or a few years down the road. So I'm hopeful that we can find a multi-year solution to a problem that will never go away. No matter what we do this year, the growth of the school district, the growth of any school district will run you somewhere between 3.5% or 4.5%. So if our desire, we just need to come up with a plan with how we want to run on the year to year, but what that looks like in multi-year. So we're aware of where the requires might be. So looking forward to doing some problem solving.
My name is Ben Buttrick, and I'm on the Essex Finance Committee, since 2017. And I think what I want to get out of today is I really do think there needs to be a two-pronged approach in terms of the budget. I mean, one is the multi-year, and I think most people have said that. I also think the other prong is the current year. And in looking at the February 12th budget, if you just isolate what I think are the contractual obligations of the school, we're going to need an override, because even if you flatline everything else, I think I don't really see a way around that other than if you cut credits. So I find that it's difficult looking at the budget to really understand what are those control levers, what are the contractual obligations. I don't know if the lines that have the teacher salaries, for example, if it's all collectively bargained, sort of what the mix of it is. Same with the TAs. So I think there's an element of just better understanding the existing numbers, because that's how I think we can get to a short-term answer. And then I think the long-term piece is really a bigger picture conversation that has to do with looking at the debt schedules of each of the, where are the windows in terms of how we can actually project that out. And in some ways, it's a related, but it's kind of a different view. So.
Thanks, Ben. I'm Brendan Zuberg, Town Administrator here in Essex. I know that the FY26 budget is still really carefully under review at the Finance Committee and also the Board of Selectmen. They're very interested in, even though there's not a selectman on this particular meeting, they're very interested in whether there are any other things that could be done to help close the gap for FY '26. Otherwise, just from a numbers perspective, we are looking at an overlap. And my role is to take the guidance from the Board of Selectmen, as well, and then help you implement whatever it is.
That's a mic or a-
If someone into the room, just want to make sure your speaker is muted.
Might just be noise and something. All right, Jody.
I'm Jody Harris. I'm the chair of the Essex Finance. I am here today to continue to seek more budget clarity. I think that these, whatever we want to call these meetings now, whether they're in private or in public, are critical to solving the funding problem of the school. This isn't a new problem. This is an ongoing problem. Certain data points that we can look at to help us make some decisions. I, like Anne, want to have quality education in the two towns, and like Sarah, I would love to not be in this budget crisis year over year where we have a funding problem. I think we need to be able to develop a budget and a program that will satisfy the needs and wants of the two towns and allow both towns to be able to afford that budget.
Thank you. So I'm Jake Foster, School Committee, Essex representative. My particular interest here is to try to work through and identify a strategy or possible strategies for funding the schools for at least the next 3 years. We have Essex Elementary building project.
I had left ahead of it.
Were you in here?
We are back.
We can tell that.
Okay, let's see.
Can you hear us at home?
They can hear us now? Great.
Okay,
Right.
we should be all set then.
You can just mute
We may
everybody.
not- Yeah, we may not hear them because I had to turn down the audio.
Oh, we're hearing somebody. And are you still recording?
It appears to still be recording.
Okay. All right, you go ahead.
Okay, so this is a multi-year projection model that I've put together. This is what we are referring to as Model A. This is essentially right now what Pam and I are considering the most realistic scenario without significant cuts. So this uses, in the first highlighted yellow line, uses 500,000 of our E&D balance. Our E&D balance is estimated to be 1.4 million. Right now, we are concerned about federal funding, so certainly we don't want to recommend using the full 1.4 million. The level of our federal funding is approximately 545,000 each year. So if our federal funding were to be cut for grants and Medicaid revenue, we might be on the hook for an additional 545,000. So we want to be cognizant of that.
I'm not, we just scroll down to a little bit so that somebody can ask me if they can see the full assets.
Can you just do the thing where you hide your banner so that it's the screen?
So right now, these are our total revenues, 4.2 million. It leads to a $28 million assessment to the towns. combined assessment change of just over $2 million or 7.92%. So total revenue of assessments of 32.5 million.
I have, if I may just, I noticed that your, now it's just scrolled off. No, there it is. The proposed 121 total and the FY 26 working A total are the same. And yet I think you had a change of estimate about your health insurance.
So we do. This is just the revenue side of it so far. We do want to actually mention some information that came to us late last week. We got confirmation that our health insurance rate is at 26.94% renewal for next year. We went out to market, tried to secure bids from alternative insurers. That did not prove to be fruitful. We are basically stuck with a 26 or 27% health insurance increase at this point in time. We are exploring some other options if we play with our deductibles a little bit, which will then actually just change where we fund more of a deductible for our employees, or if we keep the plan as is. So we are playing with a couple variables, but we do not anticipate that number going down at this point.
And I'll tag in on this one and bounce back to your question about contractual obligations. So our healthcare, other than our health insurance, other than the provider, is all collaborative involvement. So it's the subject of bargaining if we're to make any changes to deductibles, co-pays, or plan design. So we have limited tools without negotiating with the association. So it is a guaranteed benefit by contract. If we get some good news that touching one of those levers may yield significant savings, we can engage the association, but we cannot make a unilateral decision. The only unilateral decision-making tool available to school committee is to vote to explore forcing everyone into the GIC. They would have to start early fall to affect a change for next July. So it isn't an option for this year. They are not taking new clients this year. So we would have to check back with them in the fall to see if it is a possibility. So the way that would work is the school committee would need to take a public vote to move the district into the GIC. Then there's a study period to validate that the vote in the force would actually yield savings to the district. And then there's a process in which you need to do a savings share with the association that's being impacted. All of that also comes with a trigger in the contract that if we do unilaterally move to GIC, it's a reversion back to an 80-20 split. So that would also have to be the subject of bargaining. So it's something we can explore later in the year if we don't have relief. USI is our current broker. They are looking at some scenarios for us. And I think the only thing I would add to Michelle's comments on the bid process is that we did not get extraordinary bids. We got refusal to bid, meaning our business is such right now that we are not a good client, including the Mass Municipal Association, Maya, would not offer us. So I think what I would say about health insurance is we are in a perfect storm of a really elevated market meets a situation where we have people who are on our health insurance with extraordinary cases who are using the insurance at a rate higher than what we are paying in. So those two things have come together to create the 27%. So just a little bit as an aside there.
Can I just interject here?
Yep.
I was under the understanding that you had maybe spoken to another broker.
Yes. Well, we thought we were speaking to a townsperson who wanted to come in and offer some ideas to us. It did turn into a broker meeting. And for us to go out and find a new broker in the middle of our season didn't make a lot of sense because we were already in contract with someone. So I did appreciate their time and responded to them that if we did do a broker search, we would have to do something similar to what we're doing with the OPM, which is offer requests for services and then vet different candidates and go through a process. So If we do want to do that, if we feel that the broker is part of the issue, and I wouldn't say that we feel that at this time, but that's something we can discuss as we go forward. We would need to engage in a full process, spring to summer, to be prepared for next year.
But it's my understanding that we're at a critical point here.
Yeah.
27% isn't palatable to anybody. It's not just the towns, it's the employees. I mean, I looked through your plans and the increase to the employees as well as the budget, key drivers are untenable. And I think that we need to look outside the box at this point and see what it is that you can do to find a path forward for this budget season. There's plenty of time left. I've worked with healthcare brokers. I am a small business consultant. I do believe that there is a path forward and we should seek it. And if we have to bring something to the school committee and seek a vote on something, or to the union, or both, I think that it's critical to this budget cycle to try and get that number down. I don't think that the employees are happy about an extra $1,000 or an extra $2,750 annually. I don't think that's what they're looking for, and I don't think that anybody's looking for that. So I just wonder if maybe we can't find another path forward. It is only the end of February.
I'll say appreciate the commentary, and just so everyone is aware, we work ongoing with what's called a HIAC, so it's a Health Advisory Committee, which is a joint labor management group. So the teachers are aware and involved in the process because they are under contract for a certain level of benefits. So we are exploring all potential options, and we will continue to turn over every rock between now and then. We are not having great success.
So before we go any further into this, Michelle, can you go back to the model a little bit here? Can you say what your assumptions are for
Yes.
forward years, particularly with healthcare, because that is our main driver and concern this year? So what are your assumptions built into looking forward there?
So at the bottom of this model, which we will be posting hard copies of these documents online as well for the model A, B, and C, so everyone can see it. These are our assumptions. So FY 26 includes a 27% health insurance rate increase. FY 26 also uses the 500,000 of E&D that I spoke about. We use 150,000 of the OPEB funds. In future years is zero. This does include our staffing changes that were proposed on the January 21st budget meeting of the reduction of 2 administration positions, and shifting of some high school teaching positions. And for future years, in terms of the health insurance, it assumes a 15% health insurance increase for FY 27 the following year, a 10% increase for FY 28, and a 7% increase for 29 and 30. That's more in the ballpark of where we would normally see a rate increase, and the 5 to 7% increase, but right now, everyone is looking at rate increases of 10 plus, even if they're usually in that 3 or 4% range increase. And talking with multiple brokers, we're looking, just about everyone is looking at a 10% increase at a minimum for the next 3 years. So that's our base start. Obviously, we have high claims, which is attributing to our 27% increase. So that is what this working column A includes, is that full 27% health insurance increase. Just as the last line on this, our total budget would be going up 7.78% if all of these assumptions are used, and includes the full cost of the health insurance. Various lines just break down the big buckets of our spending. Obviously, we do have some small buckets, and all of those are pooled into this last line of 1.5 million. But the big ticket items under facilities, tuitions, transportation, special ed services, and really our insurance and benefits. And that's where a lot of our increase is coming from. You can see $1.3 million increase of a 25% increase. So, basically lays it out. It does show you what the projection is for future years. FY 27 includes a projection of enrollment, and then all future years actually just freezes the enrollment because it's a projection. We're really not trying to be very specific. As the further you get out, your projections are obviously just rough guesstimates, and I wanted to show you what this would look like for assessment increases over time.
How does it get to the equal assessment increases for the two towns starting in 28? That surprises me. But they're the same.
That is because we're just keeping everything else the same. That probably is not going to be the case.
You're flatlining the enrollment.
Exactly, we're flatlining the
That's a
enrollment.
3-year moving
Yeah.
average, so it's.
That's exactly the reason.
Even with that, the health insurance assumptions changing every year, so the expense side is changing, so the.
But not the formula. Yeah, not the assessment formula wouldn't be
We
changed.
never
It's
had the same
flatlining.
assessment. That doesn't make sense to me.
No,
And
but it's not the-
this is where the modeling with you on the town side is gonna help, because you probably have a better sense of how that will work than we do maybe, but that's how we want to make sure that we're working together on this, because there's certain aspects of the town side that we can't necessarily think through.
Right. And you can look at, there are assessment scenario tabs. I put it for this particular model because this is the model really is what we're
Still doesn't.
most realistic at this point, and you can look at those tabs. You can look at all of the assumptions that have gone
We can
into
get
it.
into fixing aspects of the model if we think it's off,
Absolutely.
but this is a jumping off.
But I think, what I just realized is the percentage might be different, because the assumption of enrollment order is the same,
Yeah.
but the dollar amount's different.
Well, you've got equalized valuations.
Okay,
Right,
that's the same assumption.
exactly. Everything's the same
So the
assumption.
percentage-
So we can certainly look at that, but.
So, speaking of the health insurance, sure, I think we want to see what we can tackle for this year. But can you let us understand what our options are? Because we are already end of February. We're voting on the budget end of March, or even before that. Then, even if we have to go into the unions to propose some change in the contract, I mean, that process is gonna take us longer than, yeah? So
That's part of the issue. Our open enrollment, we have to have a plan set by April 15th. Actually, no, by April 1st. Our open enrollment will open April 15th for the July 1st year. So we have to have our plan set, signed, sealed by April 1st. That's not leaving us a lot of time at this point. Our broker is doing everything possible. It's really our contractual obligation in terms of this collective bargaining agreement that we have that is determining this plan.
so there's no other options. It's going, no.
I think the one thing we're looking at, and we've asked them to run a model for us, is currently we offer a $1,000, $2,000 deductible on individual and family plan, and we cover 50% of that. So it's effectively 500, 1,000. There's a scenario. We asked them to see how many points we could gain if you went to a 3,000, 6,000, or 4,000, 8,000. With the understanding that we would still be covering 50%, maybe 75% to keep the employee whole. But get the benefit of the points reduction. So what we have to look at is the liability of increasing our obligation to HRA offset the deductible versus what we might gain in points.
When are they gonna let you know?
Hopefully a week.
Okay.
But I would say don't get too excited. The back of the envelope math, maybe $250,000 in points savings, but it's $250,000 in point savings. So if that would work, we could then have a conversation with the union leadership about whether or not we could do a side letter of agreement to amend for this year. I'm hopeful that if we can keep them whole and not look like we're coming to them with cross shifting, that they would be. So that's the one piece we have,
But that becomes self-insurance, basically. right?
and that's also being modeled.
Well, but that's what, if you pay their deductible, that's, you're rolling the dice on how much utilization.
Right, and I think, the brokers always encourage us to look at self-insurance, which I don't know that we want to go down the rabbit hole of analyzing that right here. You can't do that and be cutting and trimming all of your administrative staff back, because that's going to create more work for us. Which is fine if that's the direction we want to go, which we can't do everything. So,
So can you preview, B and C?
Absolutely. So B and C were just models, like what if? What if, for discussion purposes, if we really want to find out what our budget is increasing, if we remove all our reserves? So flatline use of E&D down to 0. And I do want to mention that as our budgets get tighter and as we go further along and our interest income decreases because we no longer have that surplus for the memorial school building, our E&D is going to decrease. I guarantee you will see a decrease this coming year.
And is your E and D primarily from past years when you didn't use school choice to reduce the budget? I mean, I know you pulled it out for the turf field, so you kind of recharacterized it when you put it in, but don't you, isn't a large portion of that from years past school choice that wasn't spent on operations?
I don't believe so. I believe it's just a carry forward balance plus our interest earnings. That's historically what it's been over the past few years.
So school choice is in a separate revolving account for E&D,
Right.
so it never, school choice never flows into E&D.
Yeah, but you told us at a prior meeting,
School choice went into
Stabilization.
stabilization. So we use school choice accrued savings from over time to fund the initial outlay for the turf field. Then when we recoup from the town for our agreement, we can't put money into, only the state can put money into school. So it went into the stabilization account.
so what's your stabilization? This E and D, you said was 1.4 million, what's your stabilization?
1.5 million with $500,000 earmarked for the Essex school building project. So just $1 million basically at this point.
1.5, 1.4, this is, assuming this is end of 2025 year, in beginning balance of 2026.
As of June 30th, 25, 24.
Well, for the 26, you have to use the 24 balance.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you still don't have E&D certified for FY 24?
No, we are working with our DOR rep. She was out on medical leave for a few months. She just came back this week. So we are working on that with her right now. This
When
week,
was that submitted?
middle of December. We had some issues with our treasurer reporting through the transition from previous treasurer to the current treasurer.
And the million stabilization that's left is targeted toward some capital.
Capital projects. We do not budget for any capital projects other than very small, more routine matters. So stabilization is essentially our capital project funding. So this is just for discussion purposes. Certainly, we are not proposing not using any E&D, or that's not my recommendation. But it is for discussion purposes. If we did not use any E&D, our budget, well, the assessment, it would go up 10.78%, but our overall budget would still go up 8.61%. And that actually is because we would also eliminate the OPEB offset. We have committed to use, current year is 500,000 of school choice. We've discussed raising that to 600,000, but that also assumes that we are going to get another 20 students into the school choice program for next year. So that's where that 600,000 number came from. So basically this would be flatline. Let's take our reserves out, see what it does for us. Certainly it is not a percentage that anyone can live with at this point. And the figures are just crazy. A $1.6 million increase to Manchester, a $1.1 million increase to Essex. It's not even worth discussing, but it's good to know. So our working model C is more realistic. Okay, so we have the 1.4 million in E&D. If we actually use half of that and earmark roughly 500,000 to 600,000 or so for federal funding that seems to be in flux these days, what would this do to us? So if we applied 700,000, it would bring our assessments down to 6.78%, still not in the typical range. Be a $1 million increase to Manchester, $773,000 increase to Essex. And this also would increase if we increased OPEB by another 100,000, meaning 250,000. And then the 600,000 that was initially discussed. So this is kind of like, it's if we put in as much as we think we can possibly do, But maybe we tweak that up to 800,000. You know, it's still not gonna make a significant change. That still brings you to 735,000 for Essex, 942 for Manchester. So even if we threw everything we could at this budget in the form that it is,
For this fiscal.
for this fiscal year, it's not sustainable. It's not realistic for anyone to be able to fund easily without talking significant overrides.
And could you just briefly share the little red triangles, the little red notes?
Yeah.
for future?
So this is just the revenue notes. Those are from more of my own notes, but, in terms of going forward for the assumptions, the Unit A teachers increase averages roughly about 4.5%. So that's what's been used in future years. Actually a 5% increase in FY 28 and beyond, because we have a brand new contract coming up for that year. And if anyone has followed the Mass Teachers Association, no one's getting out with cheap contracts these days. Unit B teachers also have a 3%, it's a 3% increase based on a 2.5% COLA, plus they also get steps. And those are our paras or teaching assistants. Our stipends, small 3% increase. Some stipends are just COLA and some athletic stipends do have steps. Admin and other support, these are non-contractual, but it does include a 2.5% increase. That's something that we could always look at, but we're talking less than $100,000 for that 2% increase. So it's not going to make a big impact, but that was just the projection. Facilities custodians, another 2.5% increase. And substitutes and summer hours are 1% increase. Insurance, as I mentioned, we have the 15%, the 10%, and 7% for future years. OPEB contribution increases roughly 3%. As rates increase, the savings will hopefully decrease, but I believe that actually is probably no longer my understanding of it. I believe as the rates increase, the amount also increases. Essex Regional Retirement Assessment, also something we can't control. Estimating a 3% increase there. Workers' comp and liability through Maya, roughly a 3.5% increase. And our Medicare tax is 1.45% of total payroll. So really, those are the assumptions made. There are few little other assumptions, out of district tuitions of 5%. That can range anywhere from a 3 to an 8% increase. But it also depends on what our student needs are. That's not just the tuition increase. Special ed transportation that has seen a massive uptick over the past few years since COVID, included a 5% increase. Contracted services, a 2.5% increase. And regular ed transportation, I actually included a 7% increase. We are going out for bid in FY 26 for 27 through 30, and our rates are quite low given what the market is right now. So I expect at least a 7% increase. And then security and facilities, a 4% increase and a 3% increase there, just because of the cost of doing business right now is just off the
If
charts.
you want to roll to need A and B, so to answer Ben's question from earlier. Unit A and Unit B are 182 or just slightly over 200 teachers, and we have this year 28.7 non-contractual folks. That'll go down to 26.7 for the 7% reduction in staffing there for next year.
You said 182.
182. That's represented in the operating budget.
Sorry, the 4.5% that you have on here versus the 6.2, is that because of the step?
Yes.
Add-on?
Yep, they get the step add-on, and they can also get an educational, not an incentive, we call it lane changes, if they get additional degrees and credits. Yes. So it's-
On special ed transportation, are you restricted regarding the ability to combine more than one student in a transportation vehicle?
It depends. There's limits on distance traveled. So if it works to do a quick pickup of two kids to bring them to the same location, yes. But we have to adhere to, forget what the number is, but it's a certain number of minutes. We are, or have we calculated a 5% savings, which may have been outstripped by costs, because we are part of, superintendents that make up the North Shore Consortium for Special Education have, worked with a consultant through the consortium to look at just that. Is there a way that we can find some savings by combining runs? So can someone who starts in Rockport swing through Gloucester and Manchester on their way to the consortium? So they did have some success in looking at that for the entirety of the North Shore region. And they suggested we could get between 5 and 6% savings. So we are doing everything we can to consolidate those runs, but they can be extremely prescriptive. You know, and one student is entitled potentially to a van with a monitor and special equipment, and that's where it can get expensive.
Yeah, no. And as you can see up here, our current special ed transportation budget, 781,000, we're actually projecting a savings of and a total of 646,000 for next year. So we are realizing some savings there. And as well for out of district tuitions, very small savings, but right now it's 1,173,000. We're looking at 1,140,000. So light decrease.
And Manchester FinCom always asks me this question every year. My tax is, this is the category of the budget where I have the least confidence, and it could be the most unpredictable, because it is all driven by, you know, students' right to access education and their identified need. And that need is done as a team process with data outside of any financial consideration, as it should be. But it just leaves us vulnerable. So we could have a case come forward in the middle of the year that we're not aware of, where we need $250,000 of expense.
Thank you, Michelle. That was very useful. We all have access to this. You now know how to kind of read Michelle's notes and comments, and you can obviously make changes and play with this and, you know, try different assumptions and whatnot as you go through. So I want to give towns an opportunity to talk about how you approach modeling and how it might interface with this, and how we think about this as a whole collective set.
I can jump in if you like.
Please.
So in terms of our long range forecasting, our budget work, if you will, within that 2.5 parameter. If we can keep school increase to our budget to that 3.25 number, that's sort of the sweet spot for us. If we can keep school increases, you know, below 3.5, then that is really what we strive for in terms of making it so we don't have to do overruns. Our town side budget is in fairly good shape and is able to accommodate its needs in the 2 to 2.5% range typically. So our big mountain to climb, I guess, whatever cliche I want here, is trying to plan for our facility needs. So we have a significant backlog of large capital needs, new DPW garage, possibility of new police and fire. Obviously, we have Essex Elementary School to factor in. And we have PFAS removals to do on our water treatment plant. We have a sewer plant that is literally below sea level. So it's not long for this world. So we have very significant challenges over the next 25 years. We have put together one scenario of funding all of those needs over the next 25 years, and it would require an additional 2.5% increase on top of our typical 2.5. So we would need to have about 5 years in a row, 5% tax increases. So that's a hard pill to swallow. So all of that will happen. So some hard choices will have to be made about the timing of some of those important capital needs, strip some of them out, delay, kick the can down the road, which is what we typically do, which is why we're in the situation we're in right now, because of that, not reinvesting all along the way. So that's our biggest challenge is trying to figure out those big capital facility needs over the next, like I said, we mapped it out 25 years. And where we plug those in. It did assume the elementary school coming online in terms of the bond. 27, I think I have it 28. I think I have it phasing in over 28, 29, 30. So that's the nub of our challenge. I would really, in terms of impact is on our facility planning and our large capital needs. So if there are additional overrides because of school, then that's just for school operating, that compounds it. So for over that 3.25, 3.5 range, that just means we're gonna, our 5% annual tax increase is gonna be 6%. That is absolutely getting in the area, not too small. So happy to have Ann or Sherry chime in, but that's sort of the lay of the land as I see it.
I can say something about Essex unless we have more to
No,
say.
go ahead.
In Essex, we have generally been at labor costs at 2%, with expenses in the ones. And that's really always been to be able to try and save as much of the capacity as possible for the school portion. At one point in time, Essex had some additional capacity because we were able to negotiate tenfold increase in the Kennel Point leases. So that's an offset to taxation. We moved to the regional dispatch of 300,000. For Kennel Point, it was like 550 when we did it. It's getting closer to 650 now with increases. Regional dispatch, about $300,000 when we left it. And we had some levy capacity that hadn't been used. And so for a period of time, we were able to work with that. But that has now all been eaten up. And if you combine that with trying to keep our labor at around 2 and our expenses in the 1s, we were able to get to this point, of course, with some help from the district where reserves have been used cycle after cycle. What's facing us is, of course, the expense, the town's portion of the expense for the Essex Elementary school project. And we're looking at a lot of water distribution system line replacements. We also have to contribute more to the city of Gloucester for the fact that they are upgrading their treatment plant to secondary treatment. And so we're factoring that in. But with respect to other buildings, we've got a lot of that behind us, fortunately. We're at a point where the amounts that are required by the school district are just really outstripping our capacity to 100%. The last time Essex did an override was in 2005 for municipal purposes. People in Essex really like to stay within the 2.5. Overrides are hard to get this year, depending on how things shake out with the final budget from the school district. It's looking like something will have to happen, even if you just consider the some of the larger increases the school has, like the health insurance. The question then becomes, well, okay, you fund this year, and then what's going to happen year after year after year? And those are the open questions that brought us all to this table today.
Jody or Ben, do you want to say anything?
Well, I was just gonna say, I think the other kind of thing that we have hanging as well is the potential professionalization of the fire department, call department, right? Which we don't know the exact, we know there's pressure in the system because attracting and retaining resources has gotten more and more difficult. So in fact, we have something on this year's among the articles of, adjusting the wage and salary scale for fire. So that's sort of more on an operating level, but that's another impact.
And that's at least 100,000, even in FY 26.
Right.
So, and that's a pressure that we'll be looking at over the next 5 to 10 years. So we're fighting off that full-time fire department at a minimum of an additional $1 million added to our annual budget. And with our new fire chief, we're doing some changes to the wage and salary schedule, how we fill some shifts and try to attract more talent and retain it while competing. A lot of these people may work for other fire departments or ambulance services, and so this is their side hustle. And in order to compete, to get them to get out of bed in the middle of the night and answer the calls, the 24.73 or whatever we're paying them today an hour isn't cutting it. So that's our jump this year. And I think that the fire chief has a multi-year plan that he's building, but he's been on the job for less than 2 months. So in the middle of budget season. So I feel like we're doing great. I think that our debt schedule starts to free up in the next 3 years, where we think we will have the capacity from a debt perspective that it won't be painful for Essex.
There's a step down in fiscal 27, and then the other big step down is in fiscal 34.
So
But it is sort of a declining balance. It's just that those are kind of bigger step years. The other thing is, it might be worth mentioning OPEB as well.
that's what it's my next
Yeah.
thing. So OPEB, we are within a stone's throw. It's not too big of a stone, within the next 4 years of fully funding OPEB, which is in our plan for Finance Committee. When we do that, and we get to year 4, then it will loosen up in our levy capacity, another $200,000 of insurance that we're paying out of our operating budget. So that will be helpful. And also additionally on our free cash side, then we will have that money available that we're putting into OPEB to be able to pay for the things like the, next 2 fire trucks that we have coming up and other capital needs. That's how we paid for our fields, our turf field replacement portion in cash. Essex still operates in that way, and Essex is pretty proud of it. So we continue to plan that way. We have had some capital needs in the last year or 2 that have been a little bit extraordinary. One fire truck, we have the one of 5 regional tanker trucks in eastern Massachusetts that is 30+ years old that we need to replace. We applied for a grant for that. I think this is our 3rd year. Trying to get a grant to replace that pumper truck. It's $600,000. And it is called on via mutual aid many times, which is where it kind of bit the dust in the fall with all the fires in Middleton and Boxford and whatnot. So we're hopeful again for a grant there, but it is truly a regional asset. So we're hoping that state money's going to come somewhere, but that might be pennies from heaven.
Can I ask each town to briefly share the kind of state of your reserves too, so we kind of round out the picture from all 3 perspectives?
Yeah, some information on that. Right now, the certified free cash for the fiscal year that ended was just about 1.2 million, but of course we spent some of that in the fall. Stabilization fund is currently about 1. And we like to be at 5% of our budget for each one of those. And 5% of our overall budget, 22.2 million is about 1.1.
I think we spent about 500K on the free cash in the fall.
Yeah, I can look it up there too. You know, at certification time, we like it if that brings about 5%. Then we use it.
We have a goal of, total reserves equal to 8%. Total operating budget. We had at one point 16.5% reserves. We have been spending those down. We only use them for capital items. So we're about 10, we're down to about 10% now, but we're looking at perhaps using some of that difference this year for, we gotta look at, we might be able to be good question to come on that. But that's something we're taking up. That's- Oh, yeah, tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night,
Yeah, so. We're doing that capital budget tomorrow.
All right, thank you all for that. I want to be conscious of time. We're at 11 o'clock already. And so the whole reason we're here is to think about strategies for looking ahead. It's, you know, as far as I know, the one strategy that at least we as a school committee have talked about is, you know, potentially looking at this kind of unique moment of having such a healthcare increase and, you know, kind of framing the funding that way. And obviously we can model that out, you know, in terms of what that amount is with Michelle's spreadsheet there. But that is one way to frame things. I'd love to hear, particularly, you know, Greg, your idea of, you know, thinking of different ways of coming at this, right? That's a pretty practical way of coming at it. Are there other scenarios that we think we should put on the table? And most importantly, what do we need to know in order to model those out? Like, as we walk out of here today, what do we all need to be able to answer to kind of, or what questions do we need to know in order to model out, you know, what that actually looks like for each entity, each strategy looks like for an entity. So one strategy being focus on the extraordinary healthcare costs and make that the focus of any kind of override or correction request. But I'm sure there are others that we should consider here.
Can I ask about on the revenue side? So both sides mentioned a lot about the capital facility needs and whatnot. I mean, including school, like there's a lot of things that we need. Are there other opportunities we can look into to get us more grants that we currently are not getting? To just look on the revenue side, not only the expense side.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the chaos in DC, that becomes a bigger wild card. So what is happening to some of the federal pass-through dollars is a real question mark right now. Even what has been passed already in legislation, over the IRA and the Inflation Reduction, those different federal programs. Fortunately, so we were hoping to get some PFAS money. I'm not very optimistic about that right now. So it's a challenge. I don't have a good answer for the grants. I think both towns have been pretty aggressive in pursuing them. And we both have good track records in getting grants, but it's a real question mark going forward.
And we have a 6.5 million federal grant for the culvert.
Yeah, we have not heard that that's going to be withdrawn, but if that is withdrawn, that completely throws out my multi-year plan already. Because that project has to go forward, or we don't have a crossing in Central Street. So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for it.
Probably grants from the state are also going to be a little,
Many of those are pressed.
yes, exactly.
And I think substantially increase the amount of grants we've received over the past few years, because we have a person writing grants now, so that we're heavily reliant on grants to make the ends meet for our budget.
Yeah, the last 10 years, we've gotten over $20 million worth of grants, so that's a big help. But I don't know if that is gonna be able, if we're gonna be able to replicate that going forward.
And at the heart of it, your grants are similar to our grants in that they are project oriented
Yes,
or in place to facilitate the startup of some initiative that they asked us to do or mandated that we do, and then they go away. There isn't I have yet to find, anyone who knows, there isn't a grant that's going to help us cover healthcare and personnel, and that's 80% of what we have, and I'm sure a struggle on your side too with dealing with inflation and wage expectations.
yeah, those grants are all capital focused, or engineering studies and capital.
In all of our budgets, the capital is outside of the operating, right? So.
It's separately voted.
I think for Essex, I think we continue to seek more clarity and transparency in the budgeting process. I think we have questions that we don't always get answers to. I think we're still waiting for FY 24 final numbers. We haven't seen the budget to actual. I think we were expecting to see 3/4 of budget to actual numbers for FY 25 that we haven't seen yet. I think those are important data points for us. It's very hard to operate without that information. I think, we're sort of looked at as the pesky little sibling because we're on the short end of a portion and we ask a lot of questions, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers to be able to answer their questions. And many times the questions are, why has the district budget increased by $10 million and it had a enrollment reduction of 20% over the last 10 years? And why is that budget not right-sized? Which is exactly why Essex was interested in an operational review to be able to glean these things. And maybe that operational review would say, hey, maybe the school needs more because there's something extraordinary that we're not accounting for, or maybe there are efficiencies. But that, at the end of the day, it always comes back to that question for Essex. And when you're operating within 2.5% and your levy limit is $365,000, and you also have the numbers up there of what the school piece is, then that's where our struggle is, and we keep suppressing our town needs. So this year in Essex, we asked our departments to budget differently. We required them to provide us with even more transparency. Instead of having FinCom members go out and try and glean these little pieces of information, we required them to submit a budget that extracted details in each line item so that we could see, well, maybe we need to be more efficient, or, maybe we need more people. We have never been able to do that because we are, as Brendan said, always looking at that labor at 2% and looking at the expenses at 1% or less. I mean, I think we had a couple of years where we had them, fund level. So, I mean, I guess one way to look at, and I know other places have done this, is look at zero-based budgeting going forward for.
That's essentially what we did this year, except for our staffing, which is contractual.
But I saw in one of your, I think updates was the 3-page, the TAs. So I remember there was a TA request for 4. You needed funding for 4 TAs because of a revenue drying up, maybe in the pre-K program.
Yes.
But I saw that you were looking for 8.2 maybe increase in TAs.
No, that was part of last year's budget with the library TAs and whatnot that were voted, but they weren't part of the final figures in the particular lines in last year's budget.
Okay, but it was an increase from like 24 to 32 point
Yes,
something?
that was in last year.
Okay, and then the 4 from the pre-K revenue, preschool revenue drying up. At the, what happened to Finance Subcommittee yesterday is they provide a great amount of detail on certain things, which I truly appreciate. We've never seen this pre-K program, preschool program as a budget. We've never seen the revenues from it. We've never seen the expenses from it. It's buried in, it's baked into other line items. I think that on a going forward basis, it'd be really helpful to be able to have that level of transparency, but I saw the revenue projection is only $49,000 less than it is this year. So is that 49,000 equivalent to the expense of the 4 TAs that you're asking to bring into the general budget?
No, the cost of the 4 TAs is roughly $140,000. The decrease is we anticipate roughly 8 peer Pal slots per classroom for the tuition base. So this year we were able to accommodate 28 students. So we're, you know, anticipating a reduction of 4 because really we have to save those seats for special ed students. So that's what we're just projecting. We may end up with 26, 27. But we're trying to do our best in terms of what is the most logical projection for next year.
And I certainly wouldn't characterize our revenue as drying up. Actually, we have turning kids away and we don't have the capacity to open another room this year because we're running out of space at Memorial because we need to have a room with a bathroom that needs to be certain parameters. And we don't feel like we have financial fallback if we can't realize all of the revenue necessary to have that class self-fund. So we're keeping it to 3. We're anticipating a rise in special education costs, which the Pear Pal helps to defray. But the fewer Pear Pals we take, more special ed students we incur with needs, those costs go up higher than the revenue that we're taking in. But we're currently charging $13,000
Right.
and change per head. And we could be taking in many more if we had room and resources.
I was kind of
I want to
hoping we
include
could,
that with EES. I think we talked about that, right?
Well, that's why I lobbied for 4 classrooms originally.
I was hoping we would concentrate on total numbers rather than
Yes.
Yeah,
how the school district is creating its budget.
If I can, thank you. So if I can bring everybody to 1 mile high, even if you look at the Model C, compared 2026 to FY 2030, this is like the most aggressive version that if we were to use 700K in reserve, even that, our total expenditures level, we are looking at increasing $7.7 million over the next few years, from 32 million to 40 million. Now, the big chunk of it is 3.6 million, it's just in personnel, based on the current contract, based on the increased percentage, and about 3 million, about $3 million is just in insurance. So I personally think that, yes, there are many other little things that we can look into here and there, but those are small potatoes. We do need to focus on how we can solve this in the long term to make this work for both towns.
That's why I keep coming back to my image. We're a bit at the crossroads, right? So we have, right now, we are in a very bad healthcare year. And we have a healthy plan. So that's definitely a point of negotiation going forward. But we have a contract that's comparable to the regional pay scale. It's competitive. It's consistent with where we've been in the past. So we either stay on the, I mean, one of the ways to get this number down is you have to go into your contract negotiations with a very different mindset. You're going to need to cap your COLAs at 1% to maintain a 2.5 to 3.5. And that's something that we could do if there's the collective will to do it. It will not be easy. And you can go in and hardline and push on changing splits.
But
That's the
even,
process. But that's how you're going to change the trajectory of your budget growth is where I was going with that. So there's a lot that will come with that in terms of your ability to compete for teachers in a pool that's getting shallower and shallower every year. And if you can't keep great teachers in front of our students, you're not going to have the great program that you experience. I'm not passing judgment. I know what I'm advocating for is I think we need to stay the course. If that is not financially possible, we have to make a determination that we need to go in a different direction and look for very creative and innovative ways of trying to maintain quality, but it cannot be in the way we've done it in the past, which means that's going to bring in a different set of constituents or people who have concerns about program access and the way we deliver education.
so can I ask, I think one of the challenges here is that, we continue to dive back down into the school committee budget. And I think one thing that we want to ask explicitly here is, what is the capacity or what are the conditions under which the towns would look at like an option in which we can get past 1 year's budget? In other words, is there capacity or is there a lack of interest about a correction or override that would help us get it out a couple of years? And maybe, you know, part of what I'm hearing is that, you know, the towns can, at least Essex, it continues to ask us, you know, as part of that, you know, what does it mean to right size the program, right? What does it mean to have affordable excellence, right? So if, you know, but we can't do that in one budget season. We certainly can't do that this year, right? That would be a multi-year strategic planning effort on the district's part to do that. How
Well, I guess I would say, I don't feel that we haven't right-sized the program. We've been reducing heads throughout the budget.
I'm not saying, I'm not taking our position. I'm saying that's what I'm hearing we're asked about, right?
Fair enough.
So how, I mean, I want to get past, you know, this year's budget, right? How to, in terms of modeling multiple years.
The problem with what you're asking, if you look at scenario A, it's not just an override this year, it's an override next year and an override the following year. So to do a single override that would avoid overrides in the next 2 years is asking an awful lot from our taxes.
Can I just ask I want to ask a logistical question about that scenario, because I can't make this work in my head. So if we did a 3-year override for $3 million, let's just pick a number, in 1 year, you then are paying that inflated budget immediately that next year. And it's not like you tuck that away in a reserve fund. And so if the school doesn't spend that money in that year,
You wouldn't raise taxes.
You wouldn't raise the tax, you'd have excess.
The excess
capacity.
you would just
You
sit on your
you
excess
can leave it
capacity.
off the table as excess capacity.
Yeah.
But you would know that the voters have allowed that kind of
Right,
capacity.
the problem is, to maybe some voters, that once you get beyond year one, Proposition 2.5 override can be allocated to any lawful purpose. And it's no longer earmarked to the school or whatever it was in year one.
Yeah, you want some sort of a handshake at a minimum that those dollars would be dedicated.
Yeah.
But I think the position of the Manchester Finance Committee is, you know, we charge people for stuff. And so I think we would probably lean more towards an override to cover the additional expenses for this current year.
And then do that again next year?
If that's required, I mean, I think, you know, there's a challenge. We've kind of used up all our extra money. And I also think that we receive a lot of input from residents that town meeting is a smaller representation of the total voters than a ballot question is. So if the schools are gonna cost more, it would make more sense to have an override and have it in the ballot box so that more of the voters can chime in on it. But if the school's gonna be costing us more than 2.5% a year, every year, I mean, we have, you're looking at annual overrides, and I think the mindset is such that 2.5% is so sacrosanct. That's just a number thrown out by the legislature. And I think that we have to be realistic about what the expenses are and find out whether people are willing to pay it. And if they're not, I don't know what now.
Because the model we're on now is essentially a 10-year or an attempt at a 10-year reset, right? With us using reserves to close the gap between 2.5 and 3.5 or 4.5, right? So we use we're at about 2% of our overall budget. It's tucked in to bring that number down. So basically, we're putting 10 years on layaway and then needing to catch up to fill the gap. And that's where we're at now, which is.
We support you using your reserves.
Yeah,
To make it
and that
clear.
makes sense, and that definitely works in law, and we can stay in that model, but you can't stay in that model and run effectively past that 10-year mark, because we're getting closer to a cliff. I mean, for us to cut our way out of this, we are realistically looking at over 15 positions. to get to 1.5 or 1.7 million. That will decimate us.
Can I hear from Essex on this notion of, a bigger, ask that might carry a few years versus the notion of year by year?
I have some thoughts too. I mean, at the beginning of the meeting, I mentioned, I think it's a two-pronged approach, which I think is right. I think we look at this year through one lens, but then the communication around what our approach to this year is manages expectations of residents in terms of costs in the out year. I don't think there's, even if you cut these numbers in, we're still going to need to do an override. I mean, we just don't have the capacity to be able to do that. And I think that if we package in this year's override, as we talked about, the health insurance and then the contractual increases, you would have to maintain level staff. I mean, I think the optics of adding staff in this year's budget, I think would be difficult in terms of getting passage. So you'd have to do that. And then I think there would have to be an expectation around sort of getting to Jody's point about streamlining or right sizing. Like, obviously people don't want to, devastate the school, to use your term, Pam, but I do think we have to look creatively. And it may be something like we've talked in some of the meetings about a minimum class size policy. Like, if you did that, what would be the impact? And that's where I just don't know in terms of that. But I think it's very difficult for people to look at the notion that headcount has been flat over the last decade and enrollment is down 25%. So like, you just do that in your head, that sort of the buckets are like not as full in terms of what that program looks like. So, I just don't know what that would impact on staff, but I think that people know that, look, we all want to maintain the quality, but we also have to do it in a way that's going to be smart and affordable. And I think if people know that that's what the plan is, then it makes it easier to swallow. Okay, this is a reality. We're all dealing with realities of rising costs of things that we can't control for this year. So whether or not you do an override every year or you try and do it in one, I mean, I guess in my mind, you deal with this year and then purely from an Essex standpoint, looking at the debt schedule, fiscal 27 would be better for an override, but I just don't know how you do that with the numbers that you've presented. I mean, basically you're showing that the cost of carrying staff is really going up, and by factors that you can't control. I also would say, Pam, that I would not want to see degradation. I would not want to see squeezing on the COLAs or playing around with the comp, because I think that would increase turnover. I think you're better off with fewer heads in a comp that is attractive for quality than.
We really need to start looking at heads into divisions, because
Yeah.
we're not flat, but the perception of flat likely comes from the fact that our reductions for enrollment come from academic teachers, not from special ed teachers. So we can be reducing for enrollment while needing to add more special education services. So if you look at your total heads, you may be trading a general ed for special ed.
The ratios change.
Significantly. And there's several documents out there from past years that show the growth of special education staffing over time. And we bounce around. We are back to where we were when our enrollment was about 1,200 resident students in the earlier 2000s. So we stay relatively stable on the academic side and adjust for enrollment all along. But we have seen, special education is one of the key drivers of this budget.
Is that, is a special education mandated by the federal government and state?
Yeah, services are mandated by the federal government. So once you place into services and have an IEP, then we're required to service that IEP.
Oh, right. So our new administration may decide to change that.
Lots of savings.
We have gone the route of developing and investing in building really high quality in-district programs to keep kids in. so that the dollars stay local and kids, can be here with their peers. That's been successful, and we do every 2 to 3 years, we do the cost avoidance presentation. We can certainly dust that off and show you how we're saving. But I think it's, I'm happy to sit down and we can look at that staffing sheet and you can see where the 2 buckets of staff lie. So we can say we're not gonna add any heads, but then if we have a student requiring services and we need to add a TA, we may need to cut something else to do it. We have to.
So I just want to note, we're just about at 11:30. We obviously need another meeting, but I would like to know, I'd like to summarize maybe what we're doing in preparation for that. It sounds like, from the school committee perspective, we should, well, we've already shared a model, and anybody can play with that, so you can mess with some assumptions and or ideas. I think what school committee would appreciate from the towns is a sense of your kind of capacity and or willingness for capacity. I don't know what the right word is. You know what the numbers are now. We'll continue to play with the details of those numbers and get it down any further if we can. But given the scale of the numbers that are there, coming to the next conversation with a sense of your preference and or a scale for how to fund this year and or any strategy you have for looking out a couple of years. And that would help us kind of think about our reserve use, think about our program scale, and so on, and the Essex Elementary timing too.
There's one number that I haven't seen, which is how much you get in E&D, how much you've gotten in E&D over the past 5 or 6 years. So I know how the reserves are rebuilding. And without that, it's very hard to guess what the future looks like.
Have a chart.
I'm sure you have a chart. I didn't feel like making that chart.
Yeah, I think the 10-year average was like positive 140 on the year, but what we were talking about yesterday is,
as you get the pencil sharper, the numbers get smaller.
and the reason we've had such good luck returning to E&D is because we've had surprise interest on the memorial loan. So the positive side of inflation, right, is your savings account's getting bigger. So the money we had left and had been expended for memorial, once the interest rate started going up, returned a much higher interest than we had anticipated in the budget. That flows in mid-year and ends up in E&D at the end. So that offset our original anticipated use.
Is that money going to continue to be there, or is that?
No, because we're spending it out. We're closing out memorial. Now there's not.
So we need to have some idea of what the closing out, I don't need the exact numbers, but
Yep.
what effect the closing out of memorial is. Will there be funds left over at the end? No. So the interest is going down to 0. Got it.
Until we're gonna be really positive and excited about the Essex Elementary project. So 27, 28, when you start to take that initial, well, depending on how you structure it, there'll be a point in time where you take the large chunk loan, and then that will generate significant interest. But
So the towns borrow the money effectively, and you get the interest.
well, sorry. So that's why there was the agreement that we didn't get the interest. So when I first started, the interest from the middle high school was flowing directly into our operational budget, and we were using it. When we went for memorial, we had an agreement that interest would flow into a stabilization account for the purpose of ensuring that Essex Elementary was invested in to keep it on par with memorial in terms of educational tools and security. In something like the playground. So the entirety of the interest went into stabilization, funded security upgrades, smartboard and technology upgrades, and the Essex Elementary playground to make sure that even though the envelope couldn't be addressed, that we were addressing tools that impacted student safety and educational environment.
Thank you very much for explaining that. It's a situation that's easy to misinterpret.
But if the interest is flowing straight to stabilization,
It doesn't.
it doesn't.
Then we have.
It goes to E&D and then you slide it. Thank you.
Yes.
It's logistics. I need to know.
It is, it's a lot of logistics.
In the account,
So
which
before,
we're just tuning in, is any revenue we receive during the year has to be put into the operating budget and then accounted for later in place in current accounts.
so before we close out, I want to give the towns an opportunity to share what you're planning or thinking about for our next gathering. Or what you want for, what you need from us. I've captured, and I'm sure others have too, questions that have been posed to us. And we'll do what we can to respond to those, but
FY '24 final numbers, first 2 quarters of this year.
I have not got the second quarter done yet.
Okay.
If you want to give me more staff, then I would have it done by now.
I think I would
But yes,
personally strongly advocate to go back out to the other healthcare consultant and whether we can use them, we can't
legally
use them.
can't. We have to go out to bid. We can't take on an entire procurement process within the next 6 weeks and we get it in broker and go out to bid again.
And where is that? Where can you cite the language that,
It's Mass General Law, it's the procurement law, chapter 30B, because the brokers have a financial interest in our contract. We can't just go to whoever we want if we are under contract with our current broker.
I need to turn it through.
So those health insurance numbers, as scary as they are, you're not an outlier.
No, we're not an outlier.
There are lots of districts and lots of towns that are facing similar numbers. It's the environment. You've got a lot of high utilization coming off of COVID. You have hospitals that are scrambling to staff, and so they are hiring at a higher rate, and they're passing the rates on to insurance carriers. You have prescription drug use that is just continuing to skyrocket, and you have very expensive prescription drugs that are very popular, that are decimating insurance carriers. I'm on the Maya board, I see these numbers. And, you know, Maya capped at 20% increase for their members. But without that cap, many members would be in the mid-20s easily. So it's not an outlier, as painful as it is. It's what's happening in the industry. We have a health industry that is on the verge of collapse. And people don't realize that, but it is in serious trouble. We are now paying, it'll be $35,000 for family plan. That's just outrageous to even say, but that's what we're doing. And it's because those costs are just stunning. Medicare and Medicaid are underpaying hospitals, and so they're trying to make up that difference to stay afloat by charging insurance carriers more for the services they're providing. That is a huge piece. And the proposed budget that was passed last night proposes to cut that even further. So it's going to drive those costs even higher. So this country needs to take a real hard look at what we're doing for our healthcare. We're not going to solve that at this table.
Medicaid will impact special education too, because that's intertwined. So, and I just feel, I am going to go on the record and explain that our staff is doing, and our teacher representatives are working continuously to try and find healthcare solutions. Nobody is just accepting for 20 years, been working on this and. But Maya isn't taking us because we don't pay our bills. They're taking us because they are strapped, and taking on a client that has extraordinary cases doesn't allow them to do for us what we were seeking for them to do, which was help us manage the cost. So we will look for every opportunity we can, and we are certainly looking out for our own employees, and they are at the table with us working through this problem.
so that said, I want to recognize we're over time. Pam has provided a link to a sheet that we can try to identify another time. So we'd like to do that. I didn't look to actually see what time span you gave it, but in the next couple of weeks, right? Because we have
I
to.
do my next couple weeks.
Yeah.
I can take,
So
if everybody answered, I can take a quick frequency.
yeah, let's not try to do that right here, but we'll follow up. If you please make sure to fill that out so we can get another time on the book before we have to adopt an official budget on March When are we adopting our budget? March 18th? Thank you. Okay. Ben?
I knew where
Which is the absolute latest date.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to adopt it then, so,
We've got to go to press.
yeah.
It would be helpful to get the budget broken out into those contractual obligations, and I would include healthcare in
It
that,
is.
in terms of
Well,
the.
she just took me through it.
So
It's
maybe
not-
the two of you can connect afterwards, just to
All right.
look at the specific lines. Thank you.
COLA versus.
Yeah. Okay, thank you all for a productive meeting. Thank you for staying a little bit extra. We will reconvene as soon as we have the time.